What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm absolutely honored to have back on the show once again podcast regular, United Church minister turned whistleblower, Canadian hero, humanitarian, loving father, published writer and author, public speaker and podcaster, documentary filmmaker, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, co-founder of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, righteous soul, and eagle strong voice, Kevin Annett. A little bit about Kevin if you've missed any of his episodes or if you're new here, and a recap and sneak peek of what you will be hearing about us talk about today. Kevin's path began innocently enough in Edmonton, Alberta, where he entered the United Church of Canada as a reverend in the early 1990s. Stationed in Port Alberni, British Columbia, he ministered to Indigenous communities ravaged by the legacy of Canada's Indian residential schools, government-funded, church-run institutions that forcibly assimilated Indigenous children, often through brutal abuse, cultural erasure, and, as Kevin would uncover, systematic genocide. What started as a pastoral care soon unraveled into horror. Survivors confided tales of torture, rape, sodomy, and unexplained deaths at schools operated by the United, Anglican, and Catholic churches. Kevin didn't just listen, he acted, demanding investigations and reparations, even as his superiors warned him to stay silent. By 1995, his outspokenness cost him everything. The United Church fired him without cause, expelling him from ministry in a process that was clearly rigged and unjust. Kevin's work contributed to the 2008 government apology and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's findings of cultural genocide, though he insists these were mere smokescreens for deeper crimes. But Kevin's revelations didn't stop at Canada's borders. In 2010, he founded the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, a citizen-led court aimed at prosecuting global elites for crimes against humanity. Through ITCCS, he escalated his accusations, linking residential school horrors to a vast international network. His most recent explosive claims center on the Ninth Circle cult, a secret society of high-ranking figures, including Vatican officials, European royals, and politicians, who engage in ritual child sacrifices dating back centuries. Kevin whistleblows eyewitness testimonies of Ninth Circle ceremonies in Vatican basements and remote estates, where children from orphanages and trafficking rings were ritually abused and killed to appease ancient occult rites. The Vatican stands at the cult's rotten core. He accuses former popes Benedict and Francis of direct involvement, claiming Benedict resigned in 2013 amid ITCCS arrest warrants for genocide and child trafficking. His books, like Hidden No Longer, Genocide in Canada, Past and Present, he wrote in 2010, compile survivor affidavits, historical documents, and forensic evidence of mass graves, exposing the Vatican as a millennia-old perpetrator of Indigenous and child exploitation. Continuing from our last interview, Kevin and his incredible team have uncovered a whole new area of crime involving the use of ICE detainees as involuntary human test subjects in Elon Musk's Neuralink experiments in brain chipping, relying on the usual Vatican financial involvement and Trump endorsement. Kevin will lay out the new evidence today that the court has uncovered about this latest crime against humanity and describe what citizens are doing on the ground to stop it. Today, Kevin remains an unstoppable force of courage and conviction. Through his podcasts, books, writings, and ongoing ITCCS actions from undisclosed locations amid relentless threats, he embodies the indomitable human spirit that refuses to bow to tyranny. A beacon of hope for survivors worldwide, Kevin proves that one voice, armed with truth and unbreakable resolve, can shatter empires of darkness and ignite a global awakening. His epic crusade reminds us all, in the face of unimaginable evil, true heroes rise, lighting the path toward justice, healing, and a liberated future for humanity's most vulnerable. As he declares, the truth not only sets us free, it empowers us to reclaim our world. Kevin's legacy is a blazing call to action. Stand with the voiceless, confront the shadows, and build a new era of light and freedom. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, relentless victim and survivor advocate, passionate purveyor of truth, content creator, human rights activist, absolute warrior, and a man whose actions speak louder than any words, the one, the only, Kevin Annett. Kevin, it is an honor to have you back today. Thank you so much for joining us for another incredible episode.
It's great to be back, Emma, as always. It's a good way to start the new year.
It is. And speaking of Happy New Year, this is one of the first episodes I'll be airing this year. So I'm really excited that you'll be part of that. And it's been not too long since you've been on, but we were just talking before we logged on. It seems like every day there's something new adding to these revelations, discoveries, and this case that you've put together months ago. And there's been so many new developments since you were on last, even though it wasn't that long ago. So I'm really excited to get into this. So I thought we'd start by talking about the death of a very high profile figure that we didn't get to cover last time that sort of ties into this story. So I thought maybe I'd hand it off to you and you can reveal who that is, how it happened, and we can start breaking down some of these new revelations that have happened.
Yeah, it really comes, a lot of what we're going to talk about today comes from this case I learned about. I was approached by a woman called Sue Moreno in Buffalo, New York. And her brother, Joe Moreno, had been a Catholic priest who had been documenting child trafficking all through that area. And he was about to go to the FBI with everything he had as an insider in the Catholic Church. He was going to go on a Monday, and Saturday night he was found dead in his church office. 2 bullet holes right here in the back left side of his head. Now the police came in quickly and said, oh, suicide, right? As if, first of all, you could shoot yourself twice. You know, and secondly, he had a bad left hand, and it had to be his right hand that did it. Now, try to bring your right hand around to the left side of your head and shoot twice. I mean, it's an absurd thing, right? But yeah. The autopsy report describing him having a bad left hand, all of that vanished. It was complete whitewash. Now, working with Sue and other people, they found that, in fact, the kill order came from Cardinal Timothy Dolan. And for people who don't know, Dolan is a longtime friend of Trump's and Musk's, Elon Musk's. He's actually the one that Trump wanted in as Pope. He was trying to angling to get him in because he's tied into all of their financial stuff. And as part of that, we announced that in the new year, we're going to start an investigation in Buffalo into his involvement. Because he had already been convicted in that court case. The verdict came out on October 6th, linking him, Trump, and others to ritual killings, snuff film parties and stuff like that with Epstein. All that had come out already. This was a new case we're going to start looking into the whole situation in Buffalo, which is immensely corrupt, even by Catholic Church standards. And we announced that December 16th, last month. December 17th, he steps down. Dolan steps down as Archbishop of New York, as does, in the same 24-hour period, John Flynn, who was the district attorney who covered up Joe Moreno's murder. So that's a sign, the kind of impact you can have, but also it was pointing us in the right direction. So we got our investigators together and we started digging deeper, and we found this whole new thing we're going to talk about today. It was just mind-blowing what we uncovered. We went to government financial records and began to trace, and we worked with people on the inside as well who know how to do this. And we found, first of all, that, do you remember Musk was set up for about 4 months as a head of a thing called DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, okay? Now, interesting, Musk himself had just a few years before had launched a thing called Dogecoin. It was supposed to be a rival to Bitcoin, right? But a Doge was a ruler of medieval Italian cities. Venice and Genoa had doges, and they were like the supreme boss. They were like the dictator, closely tied with the church. So it's an interesting reference. But as head of this Doge for only 4 months, just enough time to go in, Musk immediately fires the 20 FDA employees, Food and Drug Alcohol employees, who were responsible for overseeing Neuralink, which is his company that's, as we speak, are inserting these microchips directly into the human brain in order to basically control people's thoughts and emotions and all that. We can get into that. But so he sacks everybody who's overseeing Neuralink. And that was probably his main job, right? But as part of that, he supposedly investigated what's called the Catholic Relief Services, which Dolan runs, Cardinal Dolan runs. It's $476 million that they claim went missing. Well, under the guise of investigating it, they're actually channeling that money into Neuralink. That's what we found out, right? So that led us into that whole direction. Okay, where there's smoke, there's fire. So we began to pursue that. And the deeper we dug down the rabbit hole, the more incredible it all became. Because to give you some examples, for example, we found that the main facility where the Neuralink experiments are happening, it's called the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. And it's the biggest one in the world. It's where all of their Neuralink money is going. It's where they're experimenting as we speak on people who are having these chips put in their brain. So it turns out that around Phoenix, where it's happening, is the largest concentration of ICE detention facilities in America. And they've increased 600% in the last couple of decades, those private prisons and the ICE detention facilities. And we found just in the same month in 2025 that Neuralink announced they were going to go from 7 people who agreed to have these neurochip implanted to over 1,200. The same week they announced that, ICE announces they've increased the mandatory detention period from 14 to 38 days. It's a longer period of detention. And they're getting rid of all documentation, no paperwork. So what that means is they can grab anyone they want, bring them in, hold them for 40 days. Just happens to coincide when Neuralink increases the number of people who are getting chipped, right? All right. And then we start checking the other places where this money is going. 2 other places, the Chrome ICE facility in Miami and Straub Medical Center in Honolulu, which is a big military-funded and Catholic Church-funded hospital, which is the second place which is doing a lot of Neuralink experiments. And part of their mandate is to create the whole super soldier experiment, right? Where they bring in wounded vets and insert things in them to try to make them into kind of like, cybernetic soldiers. And again, ICE facility nearby, it's a whole pattern, right? So we dig even deeper. We find that the guy managing this whole thing is a Mormon. Now, don't forget, Phoenix, Arizona is just south of the Utah, where all the Mormons hang out. Okay, his name's Jared Burchell. He's a Mormon elder. Used to be a missionary with the Mormon Church, U.S. State Department advisor, and Elon Musk's right-hand man. He set up Dogecoin. He's running the Neuralink program. And here he is as a Mormon elder. Now, we know a lot about, as we've talked about in previous shows, how many Mormon and Catholic Church children go missing. But the other source of children is an area just outside Phoenix. It's called the Gila Indian Reservation. And I got approached many years ago by a woman called April Martin, who had documented that she was a social worker on the Gila Reserve. She said more children go missing from the Gila Reservation than anywhere in the country. It had the highest percentage of children going missing. What? And she got shut down when she tried investigating it. The police stopped her. She couldn't get onto the reserve anymore. She lost her job. And then, unfortunately, she just vanished totally. I don't know whatever happened to her. But so you put all these species together, and it's all centering around Phoenix and this Barrow Neurological Institute. The amazing thing is that we found the sources of these things, but the government, it's called the budget of the Bureau, but sorry. I'm turning 70 next month. What do you? The Budget Bureau, federal government. The Budget Bureau lists all the expenditures. There's no expenditure listed at all connected to the Straub Medical Center or Barrow, even though they had all this government money going into them, right? So, like Musk had arranged, There's no accountability. There's no oversight. It's a secret operation using tons of secret money. And we think it's all about these experiments. Now, what, for folks who don't know, what are these chips? Well, Musk describes their purpose as, quote, a symbiotic merger of human and digital intelligence. It integrates chip wires with the cerebral synapses in the brain, governing higher functions, like your ability to learn, to think, to have emotions. In other words, there's no more mental autonomy. You're plugged into a computer, and they can go and put any thoughts they want and do any one chip like that. Well, you know, their cover story and how they sell this is they say, oh, it'll help paraplegics be able to move their limbs just by thinking about it, okay?
Yeah.
That's how they draw people in, right? In fact, why are they going into mass production to create millions of these things if it's just for quadriplegics, right? That's ridiculous. And just a little story on that, which is a bit kind of daunting, but you know, for many years, as you know, I worked as a street minister in Vancouver. That's how I learned a lot of these things about the genocide and all that, and everyone going missing. And I knew a guy, Donnie, he was a street native, but he was really smart. He knew the deal, and he directed me to a lot of important information. Well, one day I come and find him, and he's totally out of it, you know, and like he wasn't drunk, he wasn't on drug, he was just like suddenly a vegetable. And one of his friends said, yeah, the Catholic street nurses came by and shoved a long thing right up his nostril into the midbrain area. Now, I know from the Indian hospitals experience, they used to do that. To reach the midbrain part of here, to insert stuff, you go into the nasal cavity directly in. And that's where all the higher functions are located, right? Our emotions, our ability to think, rationalize, think critically. It's all there. They used to lobotomize people by going in over the top of the eyeball as well. It's transorbital lobotomies. They did the same thing. So with these chips, Musk claims and brags that in 2026, they're going to go into overdrive producing these things. And they won't need human intervention anymore. It's all done by machine. Just insert on this operating table. But it isn't just there, because they hide a lot of stuff, right? Naturally. And they'll be able to insert it through the nostril, maybe some kind of weapon through the eye, whatever. And this is meant to be deployed against the whole population. Why would they be producing them en masse unless they weren't, right? So when you add that all up together, this is kind of like an extermination, the ultimate genocide. I mean, they're targeting human sapient intelligence, and we're not going to own our own minds if we allow these people to do this. So that's kind of, I mean, final quote, one of the ICE sources, he's actually an officer in ICE, he doesn't like at all what's going on. He said, Elon Musk is America's Joseph Mengele, and these private prisons and ICE centers are our concentration camps. And that's not an exaggeration. That's exactly what's happening. People being rounded up right now. There you go, even a little child, right? And remember, Trump wanted to separate children from the families. It's for these purposes, because children make the best test subjects. You know, you know, we found that all the time in the Indian hospitals. That's why they were grabbing the children, right?
Right.
So kind of that's a lead-in to what we're learning.
Oh my goodness, this is explosive. And what an interesting chain of events to build on the Ninth Circle cult, which you've been revealing, you know, and combining all of this information. It seems like the network just keeps growing of things that are attached to this cult. You know, it starts with kind of like a little circle and some revelations on some survivors and abuse. And now it's inching its tentacles. You're finding all these different branches, like the web keeps on growing, everything that this group of people is involved in, you know, and which is really good. You know, it's scary to know that, but that's the thing that people have the hardest time, I think, in society figuring out is how all these things are connected. You know, they can't figure out how the White House is connected to Neuralink, which is connected to an ICE center, which is connected to child trafficking. It's all presented very separate. When you look at it, though, intricately, like you see how all these people and all these things are all working together. It's synergistic. Yeah. They're not these, you know, kind of random projects that are going on.
That's the thing to remember when people talk about what to do about it and they say, well, we'll arrest these people. You arrest individuals, it doesn't change the problem. because it's coming out
Right.
of a whole system, right? And that's why in the common law courts from the beginning we said we're putting the Vatican on trial, we're putting these institutions on trial because they're the source of this, right?
Yeah.
But it's a class of elite oligarchs, corporate oligarchs, who want to run the planet and control everybody like programmed slaves. And this issue should concern everybody and unite everybody, right? Because we're all going to pay for it if we don't take action.
100%. Yes. I want to go back and sort of reverse engineer a lot of what you said and kind of dig into some of these things. So let's start with Cardinal Dolan. I mean, I don't know if a lot of people saw that. It wasn't covered a whole lot, in my opinion. I heard about it through you. I didn't see it trending on social media as much. It seems sort of to fly under the radar a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you have any insider knowledge on any potential connections to the case that you're working on and his resignation?
Well, there's a picture of him, I think, very instructive that I sent you. And it shows this guy is, like I say, the one that Trump wanted to put in as Pope. And that's a real indication that he's an insider with all of these elites. And there he is with Hillary and Donny Boy, and there are no Democrats and Republicans. They're all one club, right?
Yeah.
And this Dolan is particularly gross because he, from testimonies of eyewitnesses, he takes part in these Ninth Circle ceremonies and also the that ritually rape and kill children. But also, he's been seen at snuff film parties with Trump. There was an infamous one. Two of our eyewitnesses in the court case we concluded, the verdict came out October 6th. They found both these guys guilty. Crimes against humanity. The eyewitnesses saw them at an Epstein party in a Manhattan apartment in spring of 1999. That was even validated by Keith Schiller, who was at the time Trump's bodyguard. And they were witnessing the snuff film rape and killing of a young 5-year-old Asian girl. And, it's like they're laughing because they know in their little system they can get away with all this, right? Because they're not accountable, and there's no such thing as accountability in their system. But he's been at the heart of the whole American Catholic establishment for many years. And the Buffalo, New York people who I'm working with, the list of crimes that they've documented from eyewitnesses, these are people right in his own office describing it. Helping child rapists get off the hook. He sent in a team to clean out the office of Joe Moreno after they killed him. And that's another important point, to show you how the Catholic Church is a power unto itself outside the laws and government of America. Because there's a policy whereby when anyone dies connected to the Catholic Church, the church gets to go into the crime scene first and clean out all the evidence. I mean, can you imagine that? Like ahead of the police. These guys are above the law. They're their own law. They can get away, remove all the incriminating evidence and get off completely free. And so it shows you in practice that we're dealing with people like Musk that are just know they can, do whatever they want to anybody, like Trump just did with Venezuela. Just went in, blockaded the country, kidnapped the head of state, and now says, I'm running Venezuela. For the oil and gas, of course, but, just because he thinks he's God, like all these people do. Right?
Which is interesting because they can do all that so quick. They can go in and find somebody in a whole different country and, figure out all this different crime that's going on there and solve it and put it to rest. But here in their own country, they can't do the same. They can't figure out who's on the Epstein list. They can't release, different files related to MK Ultra or different experiments that they're doing. They're covering up whistleblowers and survivors. They can't find any of the pedophiles, or they don't exist. There's nobody on Epstein's client list even. So it's really interesting how they can accomplish so much in such little time when it comes to another country. But here in America, it's just, look the other way. We're going to go somewhere else.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, that's just the way it operates. But,
Totally.
They are at the same time very vulnerable. I mean, he wouldn't resign like he did in him and John Flynn unless they were ordered to, because the others who were implicated was afraid that it might lead to them, right? So they hide them, put them on pension, and but it still awakens more people to what's going on, right?
Absolutely, yes. And you see how these different shadow organizations, three-letter agencies, and secret societies are the ones that actually run our government. You know,
Yeah.
we report to the government runs us in a sense, like that's who we think that we're being ruled by, but the government itself is being run by these different people, and this small group of people is like who's ruling at the top of it all. This case really demonstrates that in a lot of ways. And so I want to go back as well to the ICE facilities. This is something too that people know about, but I don't think that it's been covered enough, in my opinion, as far as what goes on there. Have you had any insider knowledge on different things that are happening there? You brought up Neuralink. Have you had testimony come forward on people who have seen this or heard of it? And then what else is going on there? Because it can't just be, you mentioned concentration camp. Is this experiments and things like that you're hearing?
It's worse. I mean, there's the whole gamut from what we can hear from testimonies. The problem is when you go in, you often don't come out. And we get this from people who have worked or still work in the system. They talk regularly about lots of people being processed through it and then vanishing somewhere else. So there's a lot of movement going along. We know, for example, that a lot of ICE transports take people from places like Florida. There's one right out at the University of Miami, which again is another experimental facility connected to Neuralink. And they took a whole batch of over 500 people from this one ICE facility, and they took them, apparently, all they said was going west. So that might indicate Phoenix, could indicate Hawaii, whatever, or other things that are happening. I mean, we know from other sources that children are put right into the child trafficking network from the ICE facilities. Children are bought, thanks to Trump separating them. And they're used in many, many ways that we've talked about, right? Like these rituals. The foster care system is very lucrative selling children. A white child goes for as much as $250,000. They have like auctions where they auction off children. We've had that described in detail. People have observed it. So it's all of the above, but especially it's got this financial and political incentive now to head them into the Neuralink facilities because it'll perfect, this mind control chipping much quicker, right?
That's horrific. And it's also pretty ironic that Phoenix is the place too. We know all of the occult meaning behind the Phoenix and how Arizona is a huge trafficking hub. Of course, Utah is, everywhere is. But you hear a lot about Phoenix being a very big epicenter of this, along with sort of the ley line, energetic field, and occult meaning behind Phoenix also.
Right, and that's the whole, have you heard of the Lucifer telescope? It's
Yeah, do you want to share about that? I have heard about that.
I think it's connected because run by the Jesuits, set up a number of years ago, and it's in a mountaintop in eastern, it's Arizona, and east of Phoenix. And it's interesting because it's right next to one of the locations where more children go missing than anywhere in the country, the Gila Indian Reservation. It's an Apache reservation. And I talked to a social worker many years ago called April Martin, who tried to track where all the kids were going, because they just kept vanishing off the reserve. The police stopped her, the tribal police stopped her. She ended up losing her job as a social worker for asking. And, she asked among the natives and they didn't want to talk, except one old elder said, well, they're taking the children up to that telescope, the Lucifer place, and we don't see them anymore. That's all he said. Right? So there's obviously some kind of facility there. They're likely Ninth Circle, and again, it's near Phoenix. So, I mean, it's all connected when you look at it. It's just the same old story in a way, right?
100%, yes. And again, it all seems kind of random and benign, but whenever you look at all the connections, you see how it really leads back to the same source every time.
Yep.
And so let's talk a little bit about the Neuralink side of this. And are there specific experiments outside of the cover story that they told us that you've heard about they do tell us it's going to be used for medical reasons. Of course, the duality is so big within these cults. They need to give us a cover story to accept it. But what do you think, or what have you heard from insiders that this technology is actually being used for?
Well, Annett, it isn't just insiders. I had a series of emails from a woman who was a survivor of SRA. And she said, I noticed your interest in Neuralink. They were using us in chipping experiments. And she said, what I was told was that if you're chipped, you can actually beam into other people who have been chipped trauma. And as if you have been tortured, you've been used in this way, right? So you can traumatize people with the flick of a switch once you're, so it's a way to, and I've known this. There was a woman, Dr. Catherine Horton in Switzerland, who said that she had uncovered evidence, and it happened to one of her family members, where she had been kidnapped and hit with a directed energy weaponry. And she was reliving traumas that she never had. They were making her, very sick. She was vomiting. It was energy weaponry, but specifically aimed at traumatizing the whole population and learning how to do that off these SRA survivors and that. So, that's another aspect. The point is, with this kind of technology, you can do almost anything to anyone, right? And that's the horrendous aspect of it, and that it's so secret. Why would it be, if it was just to help people who are quadriplegic, right, which is how they say, they're going to be able to control their limbs but by thinking now. If it was only for those benign purposes, why would it be secret? Why would they be carting on all these people, producing it en masse? How many quadriplegics are there in America? But they're going to be producing millions of these chips, right? And no oversight. That tells you something right there, that it's for a nefarious purpose and they don't want you to know about it. Right?
Especially since historically, if you listen to survivor testimonies like the one that reached out to you, that's a component that's very consistent in the testimonies, is not necessarily Neuralink brand, but chips being inserted into mind control victims as part of their control for various reasons. Sometimes they don't even know why they're inserted, and they're trying to guess. But anything from GPS surveillance to potential nanotechnology to, like you said, mind control and body control to even medical conditions. I'm sure that they use these things to help heal, people faster behind the scenes too. I'm sure they have lots of technology to keep these people healthy and, to keep them going for the decades and decades that they're in these, corrupt positions that they're ruling over us. Yeah. So it is really interesting how now they're sort of bringing it mainstream, like they're trying to get permission to use it. And so they don't have to hide it anymore behind the scenes, since there is so many people speaking out about it. Now they can say, oh yeah, it exists, but we're using it for good. It's going to help save lives, which in some cases it will.
It's how criminals always spin what they're doing. They say, look over here at the good things we're going to do with it. But it's like the people who said, oh, atomic energy will be used to, improve the lives of people. And, the next year they're nuking Hiroshima with it. So, it's like, the old pattern, right?
100%, yes. And so you also mentioned an Indian reservation near this facility also. Was this on your radar before the ICE Center went there and Neuralink? And how have you sort of found, in addition to what you've already said, how does this all go together?
Well, like I say, as I know from all my work in Canada, it's the same in the States. Native people are dispensable and expendable. And they also make apparently better experimental test subjects. And I learned this inadvertently. One of the former doctors said they found that Native children are not as they're more pristine in the sense that they've only been conquered for the last couple of generations. And before that, they had a much healthier kind of life and psyche than us Europeans, who for centuries have faced genocide, murder, deportation, immigrant, all that stuff. That there's something more pristine about a Native person, which allows them to be experimented on better, and the results are more easily attainable. So they really like to target Native kids, especially for experiments. And that's why so many of them have never been accounted for. They've died en masse in these experiments. And why would it change now, right? Yeah. So places like the Gila Reservation and the Safford Reservation near the Lucifer Telescope, they're just, perfect recruiting rounds, for test subjects. And children generally, that's why so many of them go missing all the time. I mean, there's money to be made, so, that's one of the connections.
Absolutely. And it reminds me too of some, as you were saying that, I was thinking about some testimonies that I've had from survivors who have said that one of the reasons why they were chosen for their abuse to be put in these projects was because they had some type of Indigenous blood, and they came from a bloodline of Sioux Indians or Cherokee Indians, and that was highly desirable. And a couple of the reasons were, one, an eye condition being central heterochromia, which is supposedly more prevalent in these Indigenous communities. And it's a hint to people that can pick it out, that it's sort of been looked at as a way to tell if somebody has higher psychic abilities. And so I guess this eye condition exists more in these communities. I don't know for sure, but that's what I've been told from survivors. And then also that, these communities were very spiritual. They haven't been civilized, like you said, for very long. And so they have a higher spiritual sort of sense where they can tap into that easier. Even children today that are civilized carry some more of that. Do you want to add on to that?
Well, that's really important, and I'm glad you raised that, because I'll give you an example. Remember William Coombs, who was killed? A lot of people I worked with, Harriet Nahani, others, they were all children of spirit dancers, they're called in British Columbia, Western Canada. So they're from that spiritual bloodline, right? And they were always the ones targeted, especially in these Indian school death camps. And, so they do want to take out that spiritual leadership among the people, right? Because, for one thing, I said, why do you think that was? And William told me once, we could see what was coming. Spirit dancers, you go into like a shaman. You go into in the dream time and you can see the future. You can see what's coming. So you got to get rid of them, because that way you blind the people who you want to target. They can't see what's coming at them. And that's certainly happened in our culture. And they especially need to do them among Indigenous people. Like, another example of that was, they said, well, they had to cut down all the trees, you see, because the tall cedar trees on the West Coast, they're hundreds of feet high. They said that was connection to the other world. They very much believed that they received their visions and their sense of stability by this connection to the other world through the trees. And, deforesting and isn't just for money, it's to cut off our inherent strength we all get from creation, right? And box us in these little cement prisons. Now they're trying to do the same thing to our minds, but it's the same enslavement, right? Attempt.
Yeah, 100%. And we know that programs like MK Ultra, which we've talked about how all that even ties in, they're really big on looking for spiritually gifted children, and Indigenous children have historically been a part of that. And we've discovered that through your work. We've discovered that through survivor testimonies, that it all goes together. And so, like you said, they don't want the public to be able to use those psychic abilities and those spiritual gifts. They don't want that. They don't want us to know that exists. They want to use those things and exploit them for their purposes behind the scenes. And of course, that goes perfect and hand in hand with Neuralink, which that's the whole point, is them having full access to us. So them being able to technologically, psychically access us through the technology that they're using.
Yeah, and I think it's a sign of weakness. It's like Trump invading Venezuela, right, and saying, I run the place. I mean, it's watching little kids, with toys and technology they can't control. I mean, why would they have to implant everybody when everyone is, to a large extent, already pretty programmed and controlled? So they have to continually convince themselves that they run everyone, they run the show, and that's their downfall. I mean, when you look at tyrants like that in history, they always bring themselves down. And that's why, my hope is to get people who are so shocked now by all of this stuff to say, okay, our next step is we unite, and we stop this directly. And people are talking about ways to do that, like with all our work of setting up our own courts, our own assemblies, appeal to the county sheriff, to help free the children from these places. I mean, all of that is possible. We just have to get the ball rolling and activate people with that inspiration to do it,
Totally, yes. And we also can see how this ties into the transhumanist agenda too, where they're trying to basically eternalize humans and create immortal humans slowly through the use of merging technology and human DNA. And so you can slowly see too how that's being normalized, like you said, through the cover story of this is going to help. This is great. You guys should accept this. It's going to save lives. Mm-hmm. And here they're planning on, like you said, doing this to all of us as sort of a first step to start mechanicalizing our body through technology and merging that. And then all of a sudden, this is going to really get out of hand in ways that it's going to be too late by the time people step up, which is really scary if we don't do it now. And so let's talk a little bit more about the Trump aspect of this. We brought him up, and obviously we have these photos with him and Cardinal Dolan. We know that all these people are sort of combined. But what role specifically has Trump played in these things? And what do you think is the future plan of the U.S. government concerning these new cyber bots?
Well, I think, we've gone into a new era, and there really isn't a U.S. government anymore. It's an oligarchy. And we witnessed that the way he got, and I think, there's collusion going on from the Democrats, from everyone in the government in this, because when he ran for president the last time as a convicted felon who had been impeached by Congress twice, the Democrats had every right to get state Supreme Courts to invalidate him running in the election as a convicted criminal, right? They never did. So why didn't they? And why did Kamala Harris treat him like a legitimate candidate and debate him? When, it's like, would they have done that to Al Capone? Because you're dealing with the same kind of personality. Or Adolf Hitler, right? No, they all cooperated. They greased the wheels all along. And, it's like the picture of Hillary and Trump laughing with Dolan. It's like they're serving the same system. And they've decided that they don't need the United States anymore. They want a corporatocracy. And they've got, it's like George Orwell said, there were elites in 3 areas of the world, Russia, China, America, right? Running everything. And they pretend to fight each other in wars to control their own populations, right? But the agenda is about global elite, and that's who we're dealing with now, right? And we can't forget that. And then we realized, well, then we've got to unite across borders, which was the whole idea of our International Common Law Court. But we've got to take that to a new level now and think all the time of how we can just operate outside the system and build something new. And that's kind of the thrust of a lot of what we do now, just in terms of defending people, but then dismantling this sick system that requires all this, right?
Yeah, and you brought up such a good point about the public perception of, oh, I'm against you. I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat. I'm from this country and I'm the ruler here and you're not. And it reminded me of this quote that I wanted to share that says, in chess, white and black pieces are bitter enemies, but those who move the pieces are usually good friends.
That's a superb quote.
Yes, and it's so true. It applies so much to this. But you're right. They're all friends and hanging out and going to these Davos meetings and these different, these yearly weird meetings and events that they're having. And like you said, you can see even Trump and Hillary in the same photo laughing together, when on screen, whenever we see them, they act like they hate each other, so.
Like lawyers in a courtroom, it's the same deal.
Yes.
They're working for the same system, pretending to be your advocate. I had a perfect example of that when we brought the first cases against the churches with all these crimes. I was working with the survivors, and we got their court statements together, and we were talking to the lawyer. And I noticed that the lawyer had removed from 3 of their statements references to dead children. They had come across the bodies of dead children at the residential schools when they were kids. And I said, why did you take that out of their court statement? It's pretty traumatic to find a dead body when you're a kid. That should factor into, their case. He said, I can't put that in. I'm not only their lawyer, but I'm an officer of the court, and there's certain issues I'm not allowed to raise, which they're all take their oath of allegiance to the crown. And they said, no issue of a dead child shall be raised in court. So who did they work for ultimately? It wasn't for their client, their native clients. It's for the crown. And the same is equivalent in America, right? So that's a good symbol of the way the whole system operates, right?
Definitely. Yeah, the courts, we're shown on TV and these different sitcoms that we watch and these dramatic movies that the court's all about justice. They're all about justice. They're all about evidence and proof and, doing the right thing and wanting what's best for actual victims. And it's the total opposite. It's a complete injustice system. It's a business. We forget that over time, it may have started at some point and been a little bit more just or had some different ways that it was made to be fair. But behind the scenes, again, lawyers and judges work together. Family members can pay off and buy the actual verdict at the end of the day. It's horrible. And then you hear about all these horrific cases of children being taken unjustly and put into CPS systems and systems that abuse children and away from innocent, good parents, or they're given to a wealthy pedophile who was maybe married to a mother who's disclosing their child's being abused, and the court silences the mother with a gag order and traffics the children to the pedophile father.
That's right.
You just hear this over and over and over again. So it really is. It's a horrific mess, and that's a big part of the puzzle too, that people, maybe don't understand the way that they should. That's not the way that it seems on TV, and that's why the work that you do is so important, because you figured out a way to get around that system, and you've shown the people and people that follow you and people that work with you that we don't have to rely on authority to get justice, that we can come together and do things ourselves. And I really think that in every single way that's the way that we need to move politically. If we want justice, survivors need to start doing this more and more. If we want to change the world, we have to do it. They're never going to do it for us. And like you said, we can't kill off or vote out the problem.
No.
It's already set up. The person that's in a position now, there's people for generations lined up to take their place, and it's going to seem like, oh, we elected this person. It's the American dream. Look what they did. They started from nothing, when all along they groomed that person from a child to be in that position.
Sure. And, it's really instructive to look into our own history and what our ancestors did at the time of the revolution and 20 years before the revolution, right? There was a thing called the Great Awakening, where there was this huge spiritual revival in the 1740s all over America. And the message was, we don't need the churches, we don't need bishops. The people can carry the message of Christ to each other. And that laid the basis for the American Revolution, because they said, well, if we can govern ourselves here, why can't we govern ourselves politically the same way? Right?
Wow.
And the same people who led the Great Revival were in the ranks of the Continental Army and were signing the Declaration of Independence, right? And that to me is a model. Like, what's the first thing? You heard about the Green Mountain Boys in Vermont. They were like this militia that operated before the revolution. They would defend farmers' lands against foreclosure by the crown. And there's a cartoon that appeared in the paper. It showed the patriots chasing this crown judge down to the ship, and they would close the courts. They went in and they closed the crown courts, and they burned all the mortgage deeds. And that happened way before the shots were fired at Concord and Lexington, because the people were defending themselves against the system, and they would reopen the courts and run them themselves. And it said, well, that's right in our history of what you do if you're a self-governing American. So that's why I wrote that book, right? It's really important, along with the Common Law Training Manual. It tells you how to go about it and how we've done it in the past, right?
Yes, and that's what I love about your books. I know I say this every time, but I really encourage people to purchase your books, and I know a lot of people have and are, because your books all offer solutions. You don't ever walk away needing a part 2, 3, 4, 5, and to pay all this extra money to get to the final result that never comes, because you're constantly being led on and have a carrot dangled in front of you. All of your books are solution oriented. They all list the problem and how to get out of it in a very, very simplistic way. That book wasn't even that big, but it solves a literal global problem, being able to read that and put it into action for people. And so I really love that that's kind of the basis of your work, is just out of generosity. You've been so kind with sharing solutions, in ways that are really affordable for people and really easy when you get down to it, Well,
I know. And, I always, even as a kid, I would go in and my mom would look in the cupboard and I would have given away a lot of her kitchen stuff to the poor family down the street. I just always done that, right? It's just kind of second nature. But a thicker book, which is good, I'll really recommend this, Memoirs of a Revolutionary, where I don't really talk about myself so much as what's happened in the last 50 years in the world, how the world economy has changed to create the situation we're in now. So I think that kind of background reading is important for people as well. And that's on Amazon as well. Or through
any other books that you'd recommend for the specific topic?
Well, of course, that one. dethroning a rogue power.
Yes.
This is about the Vatican. This is one of our more popular items. It's got a lot of facts in there about what the Vatican is, its criminal nature, and the whole bit.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of those. I'll have all those in the show notes for you guys, and you guys can find all of those at murderbydecree.com as well. And I definitely encourage you guys to do that, especially just because you guys can go look up Kevin's work directly on Amazon. But there's people that pirate work. There's people that edit it and then put it out for resale. I would just love if you guys actually went to Kevin's website and clicked on his actual links to direct you to his site that he listed himself, so you guys don't end up with some type of a fraud book from Kevin.
Thank you. And also, I'm telling people, write to Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, because somebody just told me he has a $300 million yacht, and yet I get regularly ripped off my royalties. They don't pay me between 20. Every time the royalties come in, I calculate how much is being given to me and how much they paid, and they rip me off between 20 and 30% every time. So they owe me a lot, and I'm a poor struggling writer, and I've heard from other writers who publish that the same thing happens to them. It's like a policy. So they're thinking of a class action suit against Amazon to recover all that, but it shows at that level of corporate corruption, like they feel that we're not accountable to anybody, we can just rip off. And most of these people who use it are like me, it's one of their main sources of income. It's all they have, and yet it's being ripped off by this multimillionaire.
That is absolutely horrible. Like you said, they're not a struggling business where they need to pinch pennies. Like they can't give you 20 to 30% of the books that are really difficult to sell. That's absolutely horrible. You've heard from other people this is happening too.
Oh yeah, I just got another email from one of them today. She said, "I'm lucky if I ever get half of my royalties." That's the way she put it.
Oh my gosh! I obviously want to keep talking about what we're talking about, but if somebody did want to help complain, do you know how? Is there some place on Amazon to do that, or is there somewhere?
I'm trying to find out. There was a lawyer in the States who wanted to bring a class action suit against them.
Yeah.
Amazon and Bezos personally, third party him. But I'll find that out, and if people want to write, most secure email is just angelfire101@protonmail.com.
Okay. I would say, I think all the survivors, there might be just a couple that do some type of an independent sale through email. Like I know Fritz Springmeier doesn't have his books anywhere online. You have to actually contact him to get one. However, most survivors can't get published, or they can't afford to get published, or they won't get published by some of these bigger publishing companies just because the content that they're making isn't something that will even be entertained by some of these companies. And a lot of them don't have a lot of money, so they depend on Amazon. And that just breaks my heart. That's like that's a platform that almost every whistleblower and survivor chooses to use because it's sort of the easiest to get it out. And I just, I'm sure you're not the only one, like you said, that's struggling.
Because it's simple. On their system, you send them the text, and they lay it out, and they publish it free. And then, as it's ordered, they produce copies. But they take about 30% chunk, a bite, first of all, and then they don't pay the total amount they own. So it's always some corporate scam going on whereby they know. It's like with insurance companies. There was movies made about this, where medical insurance companies automatically disqualify everybody. And they know that most people are too poor to fight them in court. So they'll just rip off all the insurance money from these poor people and never pay them any benefits, when they suffer that. I'm trying to remember the movie with Matt Damon with it. It was about a guy dying of cancer, and he couldn't collect because the insurance company just automatically denied him any benefits. I mean, this happens all the time with corporations, right? And they figure that all the people can't unite to fight them, but we can disprove that, right?
That is horrible. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, if there is anybody listening, if you're a survivor that has a book on Amazon, or somebody that has publishing books to help this community on Amazon, please get in touch with Kevin. It would be great if we could get a bunch of people together to fight for this and to bring awareness, because that is horrible. This is the way that you and others, this is part of the way that you literally make a living and survive. And that really breaks my heart that they're ripping you guys off. So, or you guys can contact me and I'll connect you with Kevin, but just let's all try to get a group together to fight for this, because that's really horrible. But moving on to what we were just talking about regarding ICE facilities, Vatican, Ninth Circle cult. One of the things that you brought up is the Mormon Church, and especially we know that Utah is really close to Arizona. I wanted to hear a little bit more about their involvement with what you're discussing here today with Neuralink and ICE, and I guess any inside knowledge on that and kind of what role they're playing with this.
I know almost as much about the Mormons as I do about the Church of Rome, because I've worked with survivors there. We had a whole number of them on my show when I still had it, Radio Free Canada. And
I've had tons on my show from the Mormon Church. It's hugely involved with all this.
It's almost a mirror image. It is in many ways mirror image with the Ninth Circle. I think they take part in the same cult. Like they built a big Mormon temple in downtown Rome, with Vatican money. The Mormon Church has almost as much money as the Catholic Church, the Vatican Bank. It was estimated 67 billion. So I mean, they've got the resources to run the state, to cover up all this stuff. But like I say, if people want to keep an eye on this guy, Jared Burchell, he's the Mormon who is he's the right-hand man of Elon Musk. And he is, as a high Mormon official, he's involved in these things, just like all high Catholic prelates are, And so, I mean, they're right next door to Phoenix, Arizona. They're just north of it, right? And, so, I mean, it doesn't take much to figure out that, the same networks are channeling, just like in the extensive Catholic child trafficking network. They're getting Mormon kids too. I mean, why wouldn't they, right? With that kind of direct connection.
Yeah, in the Mormon Church, I've done exposés on my podcast. I'm sure you've experienced it as well, and hearing from testimonies, their relationship as well with the CIA and government is very, very close. And obviously, you've covered how Trump and Elon work together. Elon's sort of into the government through Doge and Neuralink, and you can just sort of see how all of that would go together. And like you said, the Indigenous Indian grounds there, as well as the Mormon Church and the access that they have, it's like a prime just breeding ground for experimentation on children, choosing from these two different networks.
That's right. Well, Mormons always boast about how they exterminated all the natives around Salt Lake City when they first emigrated, right? So, I mean, so keep that name in mind, Jared Burchell. He's the direct underling of Musk, and he runs Neuralink. Musk kind of keeps a distance, like the Godfather always does. He gets his lower level guys to do the dirty work, but he's definitely got his hands dirty with a lot of stuff. That guy.
Whew, okay. Yeah, Jared Burchell. I haven't heard that name either too much. I've heard it a couple times, but I don't know much about him either, so that's good to know. Mm-hmm. And so speaking of solutions, it's the thing that you're the best at. You're so good at addressing the problems and even better at offering the solutions. So what are you and your team doing about this currently? And then what can people do to help support it? Where are we going with all of this? Well,
it's so huge. It should involve everyone, right? And we're branching out so it isn't just us, so that there's other people doing, I often divide it into three areas. There's education, there's action, and then there's the legal aspect, doing your own courts, creating the legal basis for what you're doing, lawful basis. And in action, it's very simple. I mean, we find with these churches, because they're so on the defensive, all you have to do is get a group of people to stand aside a church or go inside and start talking to people about the crimes of their church, handing them flyers, doing that. We're very good at organizing that. And you find when you do that, it's so encouraging these days when everyone is kind of so electronically oriented to stand and meet people face to face. And people will come forward at that point and say, yeah, this happened to me. And thank God somebody's doing something about this finally, right? So start building where you are locally, right? But then we've got a whole network now working to expose this stuff and do things like we talk about in here, setting up your own local assemblies. There's a very encouraging thing we should talk about too in the future. And we've been hearing from people all over the states who on July 4th, which is the 250th anniversary, right, of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, there's people now in 9 states who want to hold local conventions constitutional conventions to declare independence from the Trump regime and to reestablish American sovereignty in their community, where they don't follow executive orders or any of the things he does. We're declaring independence from his dictatorship. And that'll be really exciting because it's creating a new focus of opposition and building the country again from the scratch, from the grassroots. And so that's really exciting. And that's something I'm going to be working on again with people in the States. I think that's one of the solutions to this long term, instead of going after individual killers or whatever, which you've got to do, but you need the long-term vision and the sense that people have hope, right? Instilling hope that, yeah, look, here's where we're heading in a new direction for the whole country. These horrible crimes have been like not a wall, but a springboard to changing, right? So it's and you read the history of the American Revolution, that's how it happened. People had to declare independence, and they did it, interestingly. I don't know if a lot of people know, but the day they signed the Declaration of Independence, over 100 British warships showed up in New York Harbor, threatening to level the place if they signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, the biggest empire in the world right on your doorstep, and they still had the courage to say we're independent and to pick up arms and, fight. And that's why America was created. So let's just, learn from our own history.
Absolutely. Yes, that is really inspiring. And I'm always reminded too, just sort of having a revival in my own faith in humanity whenever I talk to you, because sometimes it does get really frustrating seeing how conditioned people are to be ruled over, and sort of the lack of taking responsibility against it, and people just sort of critical thinking for themselves and being like, gosh, this feels like shit, kind of how my life is. I don't like how things are. I don't like this inflation. I don't like feeling like I'm observed and surveilled, and that now this microchip is coming and taxes and all this stuff. But people just sort of accept it because they're like, well, that's just the way it is, and you're such a stark reminder that just because something's been a certain way for so long doesn't mean it has to remain that way. Mm-hmm. And that it doesn't take much. Like you said, the Declaration of Independence, even, that wasn't like the entire world stepping up and billions of people. That was like a few people that got together and did this and actually created an impact, and set an example for an entire country. And so it doesn't take a lot, you can do a lot with a little when you have voices, when you have a mission together, when you have corroboration. There's a lot that we can do with a little. And the government has proven that. The people that are sitting at the top of this cult, like, this isn't billions of people that you're naming, although it does extend out and there's a lot of people. This is a small group of people in comparison to the whole world that has created an entire global control system and continues to do so. And there's way more of us. So it wouldn't even take that many of us to even have more than them,
That's good, but that's a point that often made. In the American Revolution, at no point did more than a third of the population support it. And a third was indifferent, and a third were Tories and loyalists who left the country and stayed loyal to Britain. But the point is, like Samuel Adams said, you don't need a majority to conquer, only a restless minority determined to light the brush fires of freedom in the minds of their neighbors. And we can start doing that with our neighbors and with ourselves. And I suggest one thing you can start doing is turn off all the electronic stuff. Go outside, find the nearest piece of green, and sit in the forest or near Mother Earth for a while, and you'll get clear a lot quicker. Hang out with animals and children and recover that hope. And then it literally feels like you can breathe again, and the clarity comes, and you say, okay, now I know I've got determination. Now let's get together with two other people like that. And you form a little cell and you start talking about stuff. And then you form another cell. That's how a new country grows, right?
100%, yes.
Yeah.
There was something, and I don't know the exact quote. I read some quote or some paragraph or something before where somebody had said the idea of, if you didn't have a TV or computer technology, would you even know that all these world events were happening? Would you know that there's an election, or would you know that there's this war happening or this genocide? You wouldn't. And although it's good to stay up to date on things that are happening, so we're not just oblivious, we sometimes forget that there is a whole world out there waiting for us. That is my absolute favorite thing to do, is to go take my little doggy and go out and hike and go out in nature to where there's no cell reception and just breathe in the fresh air and just be in nature and just play with him and watch his like amazement of the world, and to just be amazed myself at the world that we live in. And you really do, like, you forget that we don't have to be in control of these people if we don't want to. You know, there's a whole world out there. They don't control the world. They've just convinced us through suggestion. They've mind controlled us to think that they own the world, that and the places that we can go walk in nature and air and food and everything. They've convinced us that they own everything and that we are here as slaves to help pay for it. And it's just total bullshit.
It is, and you're so right and wise to say that, because it's such an amazing world to be in it, and that we got to get out of their cyber world into the real world, and then we get our strength and hope, right?
100%, yes. And like you said, meeting people in person and connecting with people of like mind, you know, then you don't feel so isolated and alone or powerless. All of a sudden it's like, wow, I feel really empowered and I feel confident, and we have this message together and we can make an impact, you know. And like I said, your work is really just historically, it's just been an incredible journey watching you. I know I sent it to you, but I just recently aired an interview with you from CKLN radio from almost 30 years ago, back in 1997. Oh, yeah. You had the same message that you do now, is same exact message about the Indigenous children, same passion, and just, it's incredible just seeing, you know, your journey, Kevin, you know, and how even back then, I'm sure it was hard to be heard, and slowly but surely the snowball's rolling, more people are getting on board, more people are listening and becoming empowered with the information that you were way before your time sharing with the public. And so from the bottom of my heart, I just thank you, you know, on behalf of this community, everything that you do for survivors, advocates, and just for never giving up. You know, you've really just stuck with it, and you just keep going and going and going.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I remembered when you were talking, in my family, we would celebrate, it's an old Scottish tradition, where there's two things. A tall, dark-haired man has to be the first person to walk into your door. That's a sign of good luck. And I could always figure out, why does that have to be dark-haired? One said, well, the Vikings would raid into Scotland all the time, and they had blonde hair. So that maybe that has something to do with not being invaded by a Viking. But the other thing they did is we would light torches. We'd light fires at midnight when the new year began, because the fire would drive out evil. And all the people would extinguish all their lights in the town, and then suddenly one light would go on, one central fire, and everyone would come and light their torch from the one fire. And it just gives me goosebumps to still think about that, because it's like we take from the one source of truth and life, we all light our own individual lights, and we go out into the world and becoming here to face it. And it's so beautiful, right? And I thought, like, those simple little rituals and lighting a fire and sitting around a campfire, it actually, fire, like the sound of running water and the sound of children's voices, it stimulates endorphins in the brain. Did you know that?
I didn't know that scientifically, but I felt it being around fire and just sitting there. It's like such a comforting, wonderful feeling.
It's been what's united us for 1 million years. It's sitting around the fire, you know, and we got to get back to these simple things. You know?
And I love that you used fire as an example, just because if you think about like a simple little tiny candle, like a little birthday candle, you could have that and give 1 million other people a candle, and 1 million people could literally come up to that candle and with their wick light their own candle, and it would never end. Like, it's just a never ending energy source too. And I feel like that's what you are, Kevin. You know, you're the candle and the fire that lit, and now everybody's coming up with their own candle wick and igniting, and all of a sudden you go from being this sort of small light that's actually a big hearted amazing light, but a small light, to all of a sudden your light is now filtered all throughout the world from other people who you've lit their fire, and now they can shine it.
And they can light other people, then they pass it on, which is the whole thing.
Exactly.
We just carry it on.
100%. Yes, you are just the brightest light in this darkness, and we appreciate you blinding the darkness with that light and just continuing to grow it through every life that you touch. And, you know, like I said, your books are amazing. I encourage people to go get those. And on murderbydecree.com, please go to his actual website and get books directly from his website. That way you know it's authentic. But Kevin, was there anything else that we didn't talk about today regarding this case that you wanted to share?
No, I think we've covered all the basics, and just encourage people to let that outrage activate you into doing something, because you'll join a great company. My new family, I always called it, when I lost my old one. You have a new and better family of people who are, good-souled and want to stop these crimes and create a new world together. So let's do it.
if anybody could listen to you and not be inspired, then I don't know. I don't know how you couldn't listen to you and just, have a fire lit under your ass. So everybody, please go support Kevin. I'll have all of this information in the show notes. Again, if you're an author or somebody who sells on Amazon and experiencing the injustices that he mentioned earlier, please get in touch with him. That would be a great opportunity to maybe be a part of a group that could fight for the money that you're so deserved for what you wrote and published and all your hard work. So I would love to see anybody reach out to Kevin that is experiencing that same thing. And Kevin, I'm really sorry that's happening to you, but glad you're speaking out about it and bringing awareness. Hopefully we can change that. I'll have Murder by Decree as well down in the show notes, and Republic of Canada, Kevin's documentary, which is incredible. Unrepentant is a phenomenal documentary if you guys haven't seen it. Please go on my channel too and watch his interview from 30 years ago on CKLN Radio with Wayne Morris. It's really neat to see Kevin's journey and to hear the same exact message. 30 years ago, he's been screaming this from the rooftops, and now he's heard globally. So it's really awesome. But Kevin, thank you as always for coming on. It's such an honor to have you.
Thank you, Emma.
And for you guys listening, thank you so much for tuning in. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.